The morning sun was soft and golden, spilling light across the quiet street where a car dealership stood proudly. The glass walls shimmered, showing rows of shiny cars inside, silver, red, black, and blue, each one polished so perfectly that the sunlight bounced off their surfaces like little mirrors. The place smelled faintly of new paint, rubber, and coffee. A few salesmen stood near the front counter, laughing quietly and checking their phones, waiting for the day to begin. A gentle hum of an old engine broke the calm. A worn-out beige sedan slowly pulled into the dealership's parking lot. The car looked like it had seen better days, a small dent near the fender, faded paint, and windows that rattled a little when the door closed. The man driving it was elderly, perhaps in his late 70s. His hair was thin and white, his face wrinkled but kind, and his posture slightly bent. He stepped out of the car carefully, holding onto the door for balance before reaching for his walking cane. His clothes were clean but simple, a faded brown jacket, comfortable slacks, and old leather shoes that had walked many miles in their time. He looked around the lot for a moment, his eyes bright with curiosity. For a brief second, a small smile crossed his face as he admired a sleek silver sedan displayed near the entrance. It was modern, shiny, and elegant, a car that promised comfort and quiet rides. He nodded slightly to himself as if he could already picture driving it down a peaceful road on a sunny afternoon. Inside the showroom, one of the salesmen noticed him. He was a young man, maybe in his late 20s, wearing a sharp suit and a confident smile. He glanced at the elderly man, then looked back at his coworker with a smirk. "Guess we're attracting everyone these days," he whispered, trying not to laugh. His friend chuckled quietly, shaking his head. None of them made an effort to walk toward the door or greet the visitor. The elderly man, unaware of their quiet laughter, pushed open the glass door. The bell above it gave a small chime. He paused for a second, adjusting his cane, then walked slowly across the spotless floor. The showroom was bright and large, the kind of place that made you feel like you had stepped into a world of wealth and speed. The man moved at his own pace, pausing to look at each car, admiring the smooth curves, reading the little information cards placed near the wheels. He waited, hoping someone might come and offer to help. A simple greeting, a "Good morning, sir, how can we help you today?" would have been enough, but no one came. The salesmen kept talking among themselves, pretending to be busy with papers or their phones. One even walked right past him to grab a cup of coffee, not even offering a glance. After a few minutes, the man finally approached a car he really liked. It was the silver sedan that had caught his eye earlier. He bent slightly, looking through the window, admiring the soft leather seats and the neat dashboard. He smiled again, remembering how long it had been since he bought a new car. His old one still ran fine, but he thought maybe it was time to treat himself, something reliable and comfortable for his last few years of driving. He turned toward the front desk. "Excuse me," he said gently, his voice calm and polite. "Could someone tell me more about this model here?" The silver one near the door. The young salesman who had laughed earlier looked up. For a moment he hesitated, as if hoping someone else would take the question. When no one did, he sighed and walked over, still holding his coffee cup. His smile was forced. "Yes, sir, that one's the newest model. It's quite expensive, though," he added with a light chuckle. "Maybe you'd like to see our pre-owned section instead. We've got some good deals over there." The old man blinked, slightly surprised by the suggestion. He didn't take offense immediately. He simply thought maybe the salesman misunderstood him. "Oh, that's kind of you," he said. "But I'm interested in this one." "How much is it?" The salesman gave a quick look at the car and then at the man's worn-out jacket and scuffed shoes. "Well," he said slowly, "it starts around $45,000, but with taxes and fees, you're looking at over 50. It's a little high-end, you know." The elderly man nodded thoughtfully, his hand resting gently on his cane. "I see," he said. "Does it come in other colors?" The salesman sighed quietly, clearly impatient. Yeah, there's black, white, and blue too. But honestly, you might want to check out our other cars. We've got some older models that are more practical." His tone softened at the end, as if trying to sound polite but still dismissive. The man looked at the car again, then back at the salesman. "Thank you," he said simply, his voice still calm. "I appreciate your time." With that, he turned around and began walking slowly toward the exit. The salesman shrugged and went back to his desk. "Some people just like to look around," he told his coworker. They both laughed again, completely unaware of the impression they had left. Outside, the elderly man stood for a moment, taking in the sunlight. He wasn't angry. He wasn't even sad. He just felt disappointed. Not in himself, but in how easily people judged others by what they wore or how they looked. He took a deep breath, feeling the warm air fill his lungs. His car was parked a little further down the lot, so he took his time walking back, each step steady and careful. When he reached his old sedan, he rested his hand on the hood for a moment before getting in. He looked back at the dealership, at the bright glass and the fancy cars inside. He thought about the young man who had spoken to him. Maybe the salesman was just doing what he thought was best, but still, it stung a little to be dismissed so quickly. He started the engine, and the car gave a familiar rattle before humming softly. He smiled to himself. Maybe next time, he whispered quietly, though deep down he knew there wouldn't be a next time at that place. As he drove away, his thoughts wandered. He remembered the days when people treated each other differently. When you could walk into a store, no matter who you were, and be greeted with a smile. Respect wasn't something you had to earn with money or fancy clothes. It was given freely, because people understood it was the right thing to do. He passed a small diner on the way home and decided to stop for a cup of coffee. The waitress, a cheerful woman with kind eyes, greeted him with a bright smile as soon as he walked in. "Morning, sir. Table for one?" she asked. "Yes, please," he said, smiling back. She led him to a booth by the window and brought him a steaming cup of coffee within minutes. As he sat there watching cars pass by on the street, he couldn't help but think about the dealership again. The way the salesman had looked at him, like he was invisible, like his time wasn't worth much. It was strange how quickly people could judge someone they didn't even know. He took a sip of his coffee and let out a small sigh. He wasn't angry, not really. He had lived long enough to understand that people often made mistakes like that. Small, thoughtless mistakes that showed more about them than the person they were judging. But he also knew that life had a funny way of teaching lessons. Sometimes those who thought they knew everything ended up being surprised by the truth. He smiled at the thought. Maybe it was better this way. Let them believe what they wanted to believe. He didn't need to prove anything to anyone. Still, part of him wished they could see beyond appearances. See the years of hard work, the sacrifices and the quiet success that didn't always show on the outside. As he finished his coffee and paid his bill, the waitress thanked him warmly and wished him a good day. He appreciated that small kindness more than she probably realized. Respect didn't cost anything, yet it meant everything. He drove home with the window slightly open, the wind brushing against his face. His mind was calm, but somewhere deep inside an idea began to form, not out of pride, but out of a quiet sense of justice. He had been ignored, brushed aside, and treated as though he didn't matter, but he knew who he was, and soon enough so would they. For now, though, he was content to drive home, park his old car under the shade of his oak tree, and sit on his porch with a cup of tea. The world was changing, he thought, but maybe it still had room for small moments of truth, the kind that reminded people of what really mattered. And as the sun dipped lower in the sky, painting the clouds in shades of pink and gold, the elderly man smiled quietly to himself, unaware that his simple visit to that dealership had just set the stage for a story no one there would ever forget. The next morning was quiet, the kind of peaceful morning that made the air feel soft and gentle. Birds chirped outside the little white house where the elderly man lived. He sat by the window, a cup of tea steaming beside him, and looked out toward his garden. The roses were beginning to bloom again, their red petals bright against the green leaves. For a long while he just sat there in silence, lost in thought. He couldn't stop thinking about what had happened at the car dealership the day before. It wasn't just about being ignored. It was the way it had made him feel invisible. All he wanted was to ask a few questions about a car, but instead he had been brushed off as if he didn't matter. The thought lingered in his mind, though he tried not to let it make him bitter. He had always believed that kindness was stronger than pride. After finishing his tea, he stood up slowly, stretching his back and leaning on his cane for balance. He walked to the porch, breathing in the cool morning air. Life had taught him that patience often revealed the truth in time. Maybe the young men at the dealership would one day understand that people are worth more than what they wear or drive. But still, he couldn't shake the feeling of being dismissed. Not because he wanted attention, but because everyone deserves respect. especially when they give it first. As he sat down on the old wooden chair on his porch, his phone rang softly inside the house. He went in to answer it. "Good morning, sir," said a polite voice on the other end. It was his financial advisor, a man who had worked with him for many years. "Just a reminder, we have that meeting today about the company vehicles. Would you like me to come by?" The elderly man smiled faintly. "Yes, please. Come by around noon. I'd like to talk to you about something before we decide." "Of course, sir. I'll be there," the advisor replied. After hanging up, he returned to his chair and stared out at the street. He remembered when he first started his small company many years ago. Back then, he didn't have much, just a few tools, a lot of determination, and a heart that refused to quit. Over time, through honesty, hard work, and treating people right, he built something that lasted. Even after retiring, he still owned part of the business and helped make the big decisions now and then. He had never been one to show off his success. He believed true strength was quiet and steady, not loud or flashy. A few hours later, a car pulled into the driveway. It was a clean black sedan, and the financial advisor stepped out, carrying a folder. He greeted the elderly man with a warm smile. "Always good to see you," he said as he shook his hand. They sat together in the living room, the folder open on the coffee table. "So," the advisor began, "you mentioned you're thinking about getting new vehicles for the company managers. We can easily budget for 3 or 4 new cars. Have you decided what kind you'd like?" The elderly man thought for a moment. "Yes," he said softly. "I actually went to a dealership yesterday to look at some options." "Oh?" The advisor leaned forward. "And how did it go?" The man gave a small smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "It was interesting. They had beautiful cars. One in particular caught my attention. But the staff didn't think I belonged there. They didn't even want to talk to me. I suppose my old car and worn-out jacket made them think I couldn't afford anything." The advisor frowned, clearly bothered. "That's unfortunate. Some people still judge too quickly." "Yes," the man said, "but maybe they'll learn something soon." His tone was gentle, but his words carried quiet meaning. The advisor nodded slowly, understanding that the man had something in mind. "What would you like to do?" he asked. "I'd like to go back," the man said after a pause. "But this time not alone." The advisor looked curious but said nothing more. He knew better than to question the old man's plans. They talked for a little while longer about budgets, taxes, and options. Once everything was settled, the advisor promised to meet him the next morning to visit the dealership together. When he left, the house was quiet again. The elderly man sat back, a thoughtful expression on his face. He didn't plan to go there to argue or embarrass anyone. That wasn't his way. But he wanted them to see the truth, to understand the value of treating every person with dignity. Not because of money or status, but because respect is the mark of good character. The next morning arrived bright and clear. The elderly man dressed neatly this time, a crisp shirt, clean trousers, and polished shoes. He didn't dress to impress anyone. He just wanted to look presentable. His daughter, who lived nearby, stopped by to visit and noticed his neat appearance. "Going somewhere special?" she asked with a smile as she helped him with his jacket. "Just a little errand," he replied kindly. "Would you like to come along?" She hesitated. "Sure, I can go with you for a bit," she said. She had always admired her father's calm and humble nature. He never raised his voice, never acted proud, yet he carried a quiet strength that people couldn't help but respect once they knew him. At 10 o'clock sharp, the advisor's car pulled up. The elderly man and his daughter got in, and the 3 of them drove toward the dealership. The ride was calm, filled with light conversation. They talked about family, business, and how the world had changed over the years. As they got closer, the elderly man gazed out the window, watching the dealership sign appear in the distance. When they pulled into the parking lot, the same shiny cars glimmered under the sun. The same glass walls reflected the sky, and inside the same young salesman stood near the counter, chatting and sipping coffee. They didn't notice the black sedan pulling up right away. But when the elderly man stepped out, this time dressed neatly and walking beside his daughter and advisor, one of them finally looked up. Recognition flashed in his eyes. He nudged his coworker. "Hey, isn't that the old guy from the other day?" he whispered. "The one with the beat-up car?" His friend glanced over, squinting. Yeah, I think so. But who's that with him? Looks like he brought some people. The elderly man walked in slowly, the same calm expression on his face. The bell above the door chimed again, but this time the atmosphere changed almost instantly. The staff straightened up, smiles appearing as they realized he wasn't alone. And the people with him looked important. The young salesman who had brushed him off before quickly stepped forward, suddenly full of charm. "Good morning, sir. Welcome back. How can I help you today?" The elderly man looked at him quietly for a moment. "I came to ask about that silver sedan again," he said in the same polite voice as before. "Of course, sir," the salesman said eagerly. "Excellent choice. That's one of our top models. Would you like to take a closer look? We can even arrange a test drive right now." The advisor stood slightly behind, watching the interaction without saying a word. The daughter crossed her arms gently, her expression calm but knowing. The salesman, still trying to make a good impression, began explaining the car's features with energy, pointing out details and smiling nervously. The elderly man listened patiently, nodding as the young man spoke. After a while, the elderly man turned to the advisor. "What do you think? Would this be a good fit for the company vehicles?" The salesman froze for a moment, his smile faltering. "Company vehicles?" he repeated, glancing quickly between them. The advisor nodded. "Yes, we're planning to purchase several new cars for the staff. We've been comparing dealerships, and this was one of the options." The salesman's eyes widened slightly. He looked at the elderly man again, realizing too late that the person he had dismissed was not just another visitor. He was a business owner, and not a small one. His polite mask wavered as guilt started to creep in. But the elderly man didn't raise his voice or show anger. He just smiled faintly and said, "I appreciate your time today. We'll make our decision soon." With that, he turned and began walking slowly toward the door again, his daughter and advisor following behind. The salesman stood frozen, not knowing what to say. Outside, as they reached the car, the advisor asked softly, "Would you like to go to the other dealership now?" The elderly man nodded. "Yes," he said quietly. "Let's go there. I've heard they treat people with kindness." As the car pulled away, the dealership behind them stood quiet for a long moment. Inside, the salesman sat back at his desk, staring at the floor. The laughter and whispers were gone. In their place was an uncomfortable silence, one that carried the weight of a mistake too big to ignore. The elderly man looked out the window as they drove away, his heart calm. He hadn't needed to say much. Sometimes the truth didn't need to be shouted. It just needed to be shown. The next morning came with soft rain tapping against the windows. The elderly man sat by his kitchen table, sipping his tea and listening to the gentle rhythm of it falling outside. There was something peaceful about the sound, something that helped him think clearly. His mind wandered back to the day before, to the way the salesman's face had changed when he realized who he was. The look of surprise, mixed with regret, had said more than any apology ever could. But the man hadn't gone there for revenge. He never wanted to embarrass anyone. He simply wanted to remind them, in his quiet way, that every person deserves respect no matter how they look. As the morning light grew brighter through the gray clouds, he heard a car pull up outside. When he looked out the window, he saw the black sedan again. His advisor stepped out with a friendly wave, holding a small stack of papers. The elderly man smiled, finished his tea, and opened the door. "Good morning," said the advisor cheerfully. "Ready for another little trip?" The man nodded, taking his cane. "Yes," he said softly. "Let's go finish what we started." Just then, his daughter arrived, holding an umbrella over her head. "You didn't think I'd miss this, did you?" she said with a grin. The man chuckled quietly. "Of course not. Let's go." They got into the car, and as it rolled down the wet road, the man gazed out the window again. The rain had left everything glistening. The trees, the sidewalks, even the rooftops. Life always had a way of washing things clean, he thought. Maybe today would do the same for yesterday's memory. They drove for about 20 minutes before pulling into another dealership, smaller, humbler, but with a welcoming feeling even from the outside. The sign wasn't as big or flashy, but the lot was neat and organized. As they stepped out, a young woman wearing a bright yellow raincoat rushed over, holding out a few umbrellas for them. "Good morning, sir," she said warmly. "You're getting a bit of rain there. Here, please take this." The elderly man smiled in surprise. "Thank you," he said, accepting the umbrella. She noticed his cane and slowed her pace so she could walk beside him. "If you'd like, I can bring one of the cars closer so you don't have to walk far," she offered kindly. "That's very thoughtful," the man replied. "But I think I can manage." "I'd just like to take a look around first." "Of course," she said with a smile. "Take your time. I'll be right here if you need anything." Inside the showroom, the atmosphere was completely different from the other place. It was busy but calm, no loud voices, no judgmental looks. Every customer was being helped with genuine attention. One man in a work uniform was being shown a small truck. A young couple was looking at a family car. No one seemed to care about what people wore or how they looked. They were simply treated as people. The elderly man walked slowly through the rows of vehicles, taking his time to read the tags and peer through the windows. His daughter walked beside him, occasionally asking which color he liked more. The advisor followed quietly, ready to discuss numbers when the time came. After a few minutes, the young woman who had greeted them returned. "Did anything catch your eye?" she asked, her tone respectful and patient. "Yes," the man said, pointing at a silver sedan, almost identical to the one he had seen at the first dealership. "That one looks familiar." "Ah, that's one of our best models," she said proudly. "It's smooth, safe, and very reliable. Would you like to take a seat inside?" He nodded, and she quickly opened the door for him. She even held his umbrella while he carefully lowered himself into the driver's seat. Inside, the car smelled of new leather and hope. He ran his hand gently across the steering wheel, his expression soft and thoughtful. "This feels right," he murmured. "Comfortable, solid." The young woman smiled. "It really is a beautiful car. And if you're looking for more than one, we actually have a few in different colors." The man looked up, a small spark in his eyes. "Different colors, you say?" "Yes, sir," she said. "Silver, black, white, and blue. We have 4 available right now." The advisor stepped closer and nodded. "That's perfect. We'll take all 4. The woman blinked, surprised for a moment. "All 4? The advisor smiled. "Yes, this gentleman here owns a company, and he's replacing the manager's vehicles. We'd like to make the purchase today if possible." Her eyes widened, then softened with understanding. "Of course," she said quickly. "That's wonderful news." "I'll bring my manager right away to handle the paperwork." The elderly man gave her a kind smile. "Thank you, young lady. You've been very kind to us. You didn't judge, you didn't assume. You just did your job with respect." "That means a lot," she smiled shyly. "Thank you, sir. That's what we're here for, to help." A few minutes later, the dealership manager came out, a friendly man in his 40s with a genuine handshake. "It's an honor to serve you," he said warmly. "We'll make sure everything goes smoothly. Would you like to sit in my office while we finalize things?" The elderly man nodded, and they followed him to a small glass office at the back. Inside, the air smelled faintly of coffee and fresh paper. The manager handed them a few documents to review while his team prepared the cars for inspection. As the advisor went over the details, the elderly man sat quietly, looking out at the rain streaking the windows. He felt content, not just because of the purchase, but because of how naturally kindness had flowed in this place. There had been no pretending, no arrogance, no false smiles, just simple respect. When everything was ready, the manager returned with the young woman. "Sir," he said proudly, "the 4 cars are ready out front. We'll handle the registration and delivery as soon as you'd like." The elderly man stood up slowly, leaning on his cane. "Thank you," he said softly. "You've been wonderful to us." "It's our pleasure," the manager replied. "And thank you for trusting us with your business," the man smiled. "Trust is earned," he said gently. "You've earned it today." Outside, the 4 cars gleamed under the soft drizzle. The young woman handed him the keys one by one, her hands trembling slightly with excitement. "Congratulations, sir," she said. "You've made an excellent choice." He nodded, looking at each car. "I'm sure the team will be happy with these," he said. Then, after a small pause, he turned to his daughter. "Why don't you take the silver one home today? It suits you." She laughed softly, touched by his gesture. "Are you sure?" "Of course," he said. "I'll keep one for myself, too. It'll be nice to have something reliable for a change." As they finished up, the manager brought out a folder with the purchase documents neatly arranged. The elderly man signed each page carefully, his handwriting steady and precise. When he was done, he shook the manager's hand again. "Thank you," he said sincerely. You've reminded me that good service still exists, and that respect never goes out of style." When they drove away, the elderly man looked peaceful. The road stretched ahead, glistening with rain, and the silver sedan moved smoothly under his daughter's careful hands. He felt proud, not because of the cars, but because he had chosen to respond with grace instead of anger. As they stopped at a traffic light, his advisor turned to him and said, "You know, sir, that first dealership is going to hear about this. Word travels fast." The man chuckled softly.
"Let it," he said.
"Maybe it'll teach them something valuable." That afternoon, back at the other dealership, the young salesman sat at his desk, restless. He couldn't stop thinking about the old man who had walked in twice, first ignored, then returning with quiet confidence. When he checked the company's sales updates later that day, he saw a note from the regional office. The large purchase had gone to a nearby competitor. He read the note twice, realizing what it meant. The old man had taken his business elsewhere, and rightfully so. His heart sank with regret. He remembered the look in the man's eyes, calm, patient, but filled with something deeper. Not anger, but disappointment. He leaned back in his chair and sighed. It wasn't about losing a sale. It was about losing respect, and that stung more than anything. Meanwhile, the elderly man arrived home and parked his new car under the oak tree. The rain had stopped and the air smelled fresh. He sat on the porch again, this time with a quiet smile. He didn't need to prove anything to anyone, but somehow life had proven something for him. The world still had kind people, honest workers, and those who treated everyone with dignity. And as long as that remained true, he believed there was still hope for everyone else to learn. He leaned back in his chair, listening to the gentle sound of water dripping from the roof. His heart felt light. Somewhere across town, a few people had learned a lesson, one that couldn't be taught in any classroom. Sometimes, he thought, the best lessons come not from words, but from example, and he had just given one they would never forget. The next few days passed quietly, but the story of what had happened began to spread faster than anyone expected. It started with the manager of the second dealership, who proudly told his staff about the big sale they had made. He mentioned how the elderly man had come in, polite and humble, and how they had treated him with respect from the very start. That simple act had brought them not one, but 4 major car sales. One of the employees shared the story with a friend who worked at another dealership. By the end of the week, nearly everyone in the area had heard about the old man who had been ignored by one company and welcomed by another. And slowly, that story made its way back to the first dealership, the one that had turned him away. Inside that showroom, things were not the same anymore. The atmosphere that used to be light and full of chatter now felt tense. The young salesman who had brushed off the elderly man couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. Every time the door opened and a customer walked in, he felt a sting of guilt in his chest. He remembered the way the old man had spoken to him, calm, polite, never angry. And that made it worse. It would have been easier if the man had shouted or complained, but instead, he had just smiled and walked away. That quiet dignity stayed in the young salesman's mind, haunting him more than any harsh words could have. One morning, the dealership manager called for a meeting. Everyone gathered around the central desk, looking uneasy. The manager's face was serious. He held a piece of paper in his hand, a printed copy of a customer review that had begun circulating online. He cleared his throat before reading it aloud. "A few days ago, I visited this dealership," the review began. "I was not greeted, not spoken to, and when I asked for help, I was sent to the used car section without a second glance. I left quietly and went to another dealership nearby where I was treated with respect. That place ended up earning not 1 but 4 new car sales from me. I hope this message reminds you that kindness is free, and respect should never depend on appearances." The room went silent. Every salesperson looked down, avoiding eye contact. The manager folded the paper slowly and placed it on the desk. "This," he said firmly, "is not just about losing a customer. This is about losing our values." The young salesman felt his stomach twist. He knew it was about him, though the manager didn't say his name. He wanted to apologize, but the damage was already done. The story was spreading and people were talking about it. After the meeting, he sat quietly at his desk, staring at the cars outside through the glass wall. The silver sedan, the same model the old man had admired, gleamed under the lights. It reminded him of the mistake he had made, the chance he had lost not just to make a sale, but to do something right. Meanwhile, across town, the elderly man went about his days peacefully. He wasn't thinking about revenge or the attention his story was getting. He had no idea his quiet act had turned into a local lesson about respect and humility. He spent his mornings tending to his garden, watering the roses and trimming the hedges. The silver car sat parked in his driveway, shining softly in the sun. Sometimes neighbors walking by would stop and compliment him on it. He always smiled kindly and said, "It's just a car, but the story behind it matters more." His daughter visited often, sometimes driving one of the company cars he had purchased. Every time she came, she brought food or sat with him on the porch. They talked about simple things, the weather, the family, the memories of old times. But every now and then she would bring up what had happened. "People at work can't stop talking about you," she said one afternoon with a laugh. "They say you taught everyone a lesson without even trying." He smiled gently. "I didn't teach anything," he replied. "They just saw something they already knew. They'd forgotten it for a while, that's all." His daughter nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. Her father had always believed in quiet lessons, the kind that stayed in people's hearts long after words were forgotten. Later that week, there was a soft knock at his door. When he opened it, he was surprised to see the same young salesman standing there, holding a small envelope in his hand. The man looked nervous, his suit slightly wrinkled and his eyes unsure. "Good afternoon," the young man said quietly. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." The elderly man studied his face for a moment, then smiled politely. "No, not at all. Please come in." They sat in the living room. The salesman held the envelope tightly in his hands before finally setting it on the table. "I came to say I'm sorry," he began, "for how I treated you that day. I judged you without knowing you. I've thought about it every day since. You didn't deserve that." The elderly man listened quietly, his eyes kind but calm. "Thank you," he said softly after a pause. "It takes courage to come and say that." The young man looked down. "I lost something that day. Not just a sale, but a piece of respect for myself. I realized I was treating people based on how they looked, not who they were. I won't do that again." The old man nodded. "That's a good lesson to learn," he said.
It's one that will serve you for the rest of your life.
People remember how you make them feel. Kindness stays longer than money ever will. The young salesman took a deep breath, clearly moved by his words. He pushed the envelope toward him. "This isn't much," he said, "but it's a small gift, a free maintenance voucher for your car. I wanted to offer something as an apology." The old man looked at it but didn't touch it. "You don't owe me anything," he said gently, "but I appreciate your gesture. What matters is that you came here yourself. That means more than any gift." The young man nodded slowly, his shoulders relaxing for the first time since he had arrived. "Thank you," he said quietly. "And thank you for teaching me something I should have already known." The old man smiled. "We all forget sometimes," he said. "What matters is remembering before it's too late." When the young man left, the elderly man watched him walk down the path toward his car. There was something different about him now. His walk was slower, more thoughtful. The old man knew that his message had reached where it needed to. That evening, as the sun began to set, the elderly man sat on his porch again. The air was warm and the sky was painted with shades of orange and pink. The world felt peaceful. He took a slow sip of tea and looked at the silver car parked nearby. It wasn't just a car anymore, it was a reminder. A reminder that life always gives us chances to do better, to see people clearly and to treat them right. It was strange how something as simple as a trip to buy a car had turned into something much bigger. A few weeks later, he received a letter in the mail. It was from the manager of the first dealership. The letter was handwritten and heartfelt. It thanked him for the quiet lesson he had unknowingly given them. The manager wrote about how the company had changed its policies, now training employees to greet and assist every person equally. They had even printed a small poster to hang near the entrance that read, "Every customer deserves respect, because respect costs nothing, but means everything." The elderly man read the letter twice, a small smile tugging at his lips. He folded it carefully and placed it in a drawer beside his chair. It wasn't the apology that made him happy. It was the change that followed. He leaned back, closing his eyes for a moment, listening to the soft rustle of the wind outside. Life, he thought, has a way of circling back. What we give out, kindness, patience, or even silence, and always finds its way home. That night he slept peacefully. There was no anger left, no disappointment, only calm satisfaction that he had done the right thing, the quiet way. Across town, the young salesman closed up for the day. As he locked the showroom doors, he looked at the poster hanging by the entrance. He read the words again and smiled softly. He knew he'd never forget the old man with the kind eyes and patient voice, the one who had changed the way he saw people forever. And somewhere in that quiet town, a simple truth had taken root, one that would keep growing long after the story had been told and retold. Respect everyone. Because you never know who's walking through the door and what story they carry with them. A few months passed and the air turned cooler as the leaves began to change color. The old man's life returned to its calm routine. Mornings in the garden, quiet lunches, and evenings spent watching the sunset from his porch. But something was different now. Everywhere he went, people seemed to recognize him, though they didn't always know his name. Sometimes when he went to the grocery store or stopped at a cafe, someone would walk up and say, "Are you the gentleman from that dealership story?" He would smile softly and nod. They always had the same look, part admiration, part curiosity. Some thanked him for reminding people to stay humble. Others simply said, "I wish there were more people like you." He never boasted about it. He didn't feel like a hero. In his heart, he was just a man who wanted to buy a car and was treated unfairly. But what made him happiest was knowing that his quiet reaction had caused something good to grow in others. His daughter sometimes teased him about it. "You've become a bit of a local celebrity," she said with a grin as they drove together one weekend. "Everywhere we go, someone's talking about you." He laughed softly. "If people are talking about respect, then that's fine by me," he said. "We could use more of it in the world." She smiled, knowing her father never cared for fame. He cared about people, and that was what made the story so powerful. One Saturday morning, he decided to drive into town to get the car washed. The man at the car wash, a friendly worker in his 30s, greeted him warmly. "Good to see you again, sir. You know, your story really changed how we do business around here. We treat every customer like family now." The old man smiled, handing over his keys. "That's good to hear," he said. "It makes a difference, doesn't it?" "It sure does," the man replied. "You'd be surprised how people open up when you just treat them kindly." While waiting for his car, the old man sat on a bench under a tree, watching the busy street. Families were shopping, kids were laughing, people were greeting one another. It made him think about how a single action, even a small one, could ripple through a community. Later that day, as he drove home, he passed the first dealership, the one where he had been ignored. For a moment, he thought about driving past it without stopping, but something in him made him slow down. The big glass windows gleamed under the afternoon sun, and he noticed something new. Near the entrance, above the door, there was a large sign that read, "Every person matters. Every story deserves respect." He parked his car by the sidewalk and watched quietly. A few salespeople stood inside, talking to customers, smiling genuinely. One of them was the young man who had once ignored him. But now he was different, attentive, polite, full of warmth in his tone. The old man smiled to himself, feeling a soft pride in his heart. He didn't need to go inside. Seeing the change from afar was enough. It meant his message had taken root. Not through anger, not through arguments, but through grace. As he sat in his car, a young couple walked past. The woman whispered, "That's the man from the story." The man smiled and waved politely. "You taught everyone a good lesson, sir," he said. The old man chuckled softly. "I just reminded people of something they already knew," he said. "To be kind." He drove away slowly, heading toward the quiet road that led back home. The trees along the roadside were beginning to turn golden, their leaves dancing in the wind. He rolled down his window to feel the cool air on his face. That night, as he sat in his favorite chair by the window, he thought about everything that had happened. Life had a funny way of teaching lessons. Sometimes it used big dramatic moments, and sometimes it used small, simple ones. His experience at that dealership had started out as something painful, being judged, being dismissed. But it had turned into something